Well, good afternoon. I'd like to start today with a story. It's a real story that reminds us that God's providence did not end with the last chapter of the Bible. Jesus said, "My Father is always working." God has never been idle, not before creation, not now, not ever. His hand still moves, His grace still redeems, and His will still stands and always will stand. But you ever feel, and I want to say that term cautiously because our feelings can lie to us, right? But do you ever feel that God doesn't always write in straight lines? And what I mean by that is that every believer eventually has something in their walk where they ask God, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" There's a man who once said, "I was angry with God. I was angry with God for not existing, and I was angry with God for creating a world that was so cruel." This man suffered loss, he suffered betrayal, and he suffered depression in a season that felt completely pointless. He spent most of his early life trying not to believe in God, and this was a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant, very logical as well. But he was wounded, he was hurt. When he was only 9 years old, his mother started suffering from abdominal pain, and so they took her in to the doctor to see what was going on, and they later found out that she had stomach cancer. And so what does a 9-year-old boy do who has his mother suffering from stomach cancer? He prays. He grabs his brother and he prays, "God, please heal my mom. Heal my mom." On August 23rd, 1908, his mother passed away, and in the months following, the father, unable to bear the loss of losing his wife, started spiraling and sent him and his brother out to boarding school in England. It was strict, it was harsh, it was spiritually cold, and so in the span of just a few months, this boy lost his mother, lost his home, his sense of safety, and everything he grew up in. And he was separated from his father. Worst of all, he lost his faith in the process because that loss felt like proof that God wasn't real. And if God was real, he sure wasn't listening. This man was C.S. Lewis. And while God didn't move in the way that C.S. Lewis had asked, God did move in a way that would one day make C.S. Lewis a voice to millions who had felt the same silence. And you know, that sounds like another man that we know from Scripture. This was a man whose story began with pain and betrayal, a man who lost everything before he even knew what God was doing. He was hated by his brothers. He was betrayed and nearly murdered. He was sold into slavery for silver, torn from his home, separated from his father, tempted and falsely accused, and then left into a prison where he thought he was going to spend the rest of his life and completely forgotten about. This man was Joseph. And I don't know about you, but if I were in this situation, at some point I would ask, "God, what are you doing?" So where was God in all of this? Was he inactive? Was he absent? Did he hear everything and just not care? Well, before we dive deeper and answer that question, let's anchor where the story of Joseph sits in redemptive history as it pertains to the whole meta-narrative. We've got the Noahic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and it sits right there between the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. Joseph is 17 years old at this point. So if you could please turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 37, we'll start in verse 1. It says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, Israel's Jacob, right? Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peacefully to him. So 2 big points here. Number 1, Joseph is loved by his father, beloved by his father. And number 2, Joseph is hated by his brothers, so much so that they can't even speak peacefully amongst each other. I mean, have you ever been around someone? It's like walking on eggshells. I mean, the things are so tense that no matter what you do, what you say, it just feels tense. It's so tense you can like cut the thickness out with a knife in the air. There is no peaceful speaking between them. It is tense. I mean, we're not even 4 verses in, and just imagine the emotional stress Joseph might be under. I mean, this is a daily living situation for him. If you're around the wrong people, your life can be miserable. Now, Joseph has several dreams, one where he's binding sheaves in the field. His sheaf rises and stands upright, and then his brother's sheaves gather around his, and they start bowing down to his sheaf. He has a second dream where the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to him as well. I mean, think about that for a second. Your brothers hate you, and now you have to go up and tell them, hey, by the way, I had a dream where you guys were all bowing down to me. I'm sure that's a conversation that went over well. Well, it didn't, because the text says that they hated him even more because of the dreams. Now, later on, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers in the field. Let's jump down to verse 18. It says, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we'll say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. So now Joseph is not only hated by his brothers, but they now hate him so much, especially because of the dreams, that they want to murder him. They want to take his life. After some deliberation, they decide there's a different way to get rid of Joseph. Let's jump down to verse 28. It says, then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Let's take a look at this map here for a second. When Jacob told Joseph to go check on his brothers, this was not like hey, go in the backyard and check on your brothers. This was a 55-mile journey up to Shechem up there, and then another 25 miles or so to Dothan. And he's doing this alone as a 17-year-old boy, going to check on his brothers. Then another 200 plus miles out to Egypt when he was sold into slavery. If you think about the heartbreak in that moment, the same brothers he was sent to check on, he just went 70 plus miles to go check on, the same ones he went to see if all is well with you, if all is well with the flock, are now the ones who betray him. It's about to get a lot worse for Joseph. Joseph was purchased by an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh. Anybody know his name? Nobody? Potiphar. He was basically the head of security, and so Joseph starts to develop a new normal. I guess you can call it normal if you're a slave, but a new way of life after being sold by his brothers. And although he's a slave, the text tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. And that's so important because Joseph may have felt abandoned by God, but God did not abandon Joseph. In fact, Potiphar notices that everything Joseph touches prospers. And so Potiphar promotes Joseph to the head of his household, trusting him to manage his entire household. And so when things start looking up, unfortunately though, Joseph is about to get yet another trial. Now, Potiphar's wife notices Joseph's success, his appearance, and she tries to seduce Joseph. Let's read it. This is chapter 39, verse 11. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. So Joseph leaves. He does the right thing at this point. Let's continue. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." So Potiphar's wife has lied and now falsely accused Joseph of trying to lie with her. Let's continue. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, about to lie again, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you've brought among us came in to laugh at me, but as soon as I lifted up my voice and I cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." So she's now lied a second time. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. In other words, he was furious at Joseph for something that Joseph didn't do. Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners confined, and he was there in prison. So Joseph was tempted and falsely accused, and even though he was innocent, Joseph still ends up in prison. I know if I were Joseph, I would be asking God, "I was faithful to you. I did the right thing. How could you let me end up in prison?" The text continues in verse 21. "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." God is working behind the scenes. He's orchestrating something. Now, while in prison, the prison warden ends up putting Joseph in charge of all of the other prisoners, completely trusting Joseph with all of those responsibilities. Now, during his stay in prison, we read that Pharaoh's cupbearer and his chief baker are thrown into prison with Joseph. And they have dreams that bother them, and they cannot understand them. And Joseph interprets these dreams for them. Let's go ahead and read it. This is chapter 40, starting in verse 9. It says, "So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, 'In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, its blossom shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand.' Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in your hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it's well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here I also have done nothing that they should put me into the pit.' When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, 'I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head.' And Joseph answered and said, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you.'" Now, the interpretations come true exactly as Joseph said. Pharaoh restores the chief cupbearer, but he also hangs the chief baker, just as Joseph had said. And unfortunately, even though Joseph had asked the chief cupbearer to remember him, he forgot him. Seems that Joseph just can't catch a break. I mean, maybe there was this small ounce of hope. This guy's going to get me out of here. Finally, God is doing something. He's moving. He's going to get me out of here. This is my chance. It's just tribulation after tribulation after tribulation for Joseph, and he completely forgets about him. Let's move to chapter 41, verse 1. The first sentence says, "After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile." Let's stop there for a second. Just a couple of sentences ago, he thought he may have been getting out of prison. And 2 whole years passed by. He was there for another 2 years. I mean, think about being separated from your loved ones for 2 years. That continued on for another 2 years. That's a long time. It's a long time. Let's continue. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep, and he dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk, and behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt, all of its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there were none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh's troubled, and now all of a sudden, 2 years later, the chief cupbearer remembers Joseph in prison. Hey, by the way, I remember there's this guy here in prison. He can interpret my dream. Maybe he can interpret yours. So Pharaoh summons Joseph, and they get him cleaned up to enter his presence of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh goes ahead and he recites his dreams to Joseph to see if Joseph can interpret for him. So Pharaoh recites his dreams to Joseph, and then Joseph begins to explain there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And then he comes up with a plan to rescue Egypt during this time of famine. Pharaoh likes the idea and ultimately places him as second in command over all of Egypt. Let's read it. Genesis 41:38. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants, and Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Notice God is getting glory through this. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only regards to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand, and he put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen, put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Think about that last sentence. 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. From 17 years old, starting in the pit, to now 12, 13 years later. That's a long time to go through tribulation after tribulation after tribulation. Joseph's plan ultimately works, and as a result, he saves countless lives, including his own family, the same family who threw him into the pit 12 years earlier and sold him into slavery. Let's turn our Bibles one more time to Genesis 50, verse 20. It says, "As for you," he's talking about his brothers here, You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Joseph's brothers meant evil towards Joseph, but God meant it for good. See, God used every betrayal, every delay, every dark night to position Joseph exactly where he needed to be, to save lives and to display his glory. And the point isn't just that God was working, it's that he was weaving redemption through every hardship, the pit, the prison, the palace. They were all stages where God was preaching one message, that salvation belongs to the Lord. Joseph's story was a living picture of the world's sin problem, that sin separates and salvation must come from outside of ourselves. It's a microcosm of the meta-narrative. A microcosm is just a small picture of something larger, but the meta-narrative is this, that sin separates, but God sends the innocent to bear the blame, to be falsely accused, and to save a people for himself. You see, while Joseph was being sold into slavery, God had already ordained his promotion. When Joseph was being falsely accused, God had already ordained his vindication. And when Joseph was rotting in the prison, or so it seemed like, God had already ordained the greater resurrection of Jesus Christ. God was preaching the story of Jesus before Jesus ever came. Take a look at this chart I'm going to put up, and keep in mind, all analogies, they have a breaking point. This is definitely not one-to-one, apples to apples, but look at these similarities of how Jesus was being preached through Joseph. Joseph, beloved son of his father. Jesus, beloved son of the Father. Joseph, sent to his brothers and rejected. Jesus came to his own and not received. Joseph, stripped of his robe. Jesus, stripped and mocked. Joseph, sold for silver. Jesus, betrayed for silver. Joseph, tempted yet faithful. Jesus, tempted yet without sin. Joseph, counted with 2 prisoners, one restored, one condemned. Jesus, crucified with 2 criminals, one believes, one rejects. Joseph, exalted to rule at Pharaoh's right hand. Jesus, exalted to the Father's right hand. Joseph gives bread to the world in famine. Jesus, bread of life to the world. Joseph forgives his betrayers. Jesus, Father, forgive them. Joseph, God sent me to save many lives. Jesus, he will save his people from their sins. I mean, every detail between Joseph and Jesus is proof that God was never improvising. He was orchestrating everything. God doesn't react to history. He rules it. He doesn't adjust his plan. He executes it with fine precision. And when it looks like chaos, when it feels like he's not writing in straight lines, when it feels like we need to ask, God, what are you doing? He's still commanding every detail for his glory. Joseph's pain was never random. It was written by a sovereign God who works all things together for good. God is never absent. Even when Joseph felt forgotten, when he was never outside of God's plan. God's silence is not his absence. It's his sovereignty working unseen. The doctrine of providence means that not one tear, one betrayal, one delay is ever wasted. Maybe you get a flat tire on the way to work, or you lose your job, or you get betrayed by someone. But God's providence means that those things didn't just happen. They didn't just happen. God uses even that frustration, that pain, that delay to serve his eternal purpose. Maybe you go through a breakup. Maybe you went through a breakup, and it feels completely hopeless. Or you feel crushed, only to later realize that God freed you up for something that served his greater purpose, your deeper good, maybe a godlier spouse, maybe a new calling, maybe a closer walk. with Christ. Maybe you know someone that gets sick and you pray for their healing. But instead of immediate recovery, God uses that season to produce humility, dependence, and so important, we forget this all the time, an eternal perspective. Our lives are a blip on the timeline of eternity. He might heal physically, he might. Or he might heal spiritually through the trial. God's providence doesn't always remove pain. Sometimes God's providence redeems pain through his perfect plan. Joseph's brothers meant to destroy Joseph, but God used their sin to save them. Think about that. The same is true at the cross. What the world meant for evil, God ordained for our redemption. Joseph was physically enslaved. Israel would later become nationally enslaved, but both point to the deeper truth that we're born slaves to sin. But just as God sent Joseph to save his brothers, he sent Jesus to save us, not from Egypt, but from eternal bondage. Joseph's prison was not punishment, it was preparation. God uses tribulation to refine and to prove genuine faith, not to earn salvation. So don't waste your suffering. Ask, Lord, what are you teaching me about yourself through this? So where is God when you're in the pit? Like Joseph was. Right where he's always been. Working all details together for his glory, and to the Christian in the room, for your good. It's incredible that God establishes the unlikely to positions of honor. I mean, who would look at Joseph in the pit when he was 17 years old and say, yep, he's going to be second in command of all of Egypt? Who would look at me? Who would look at us, slaves to sin, and say, yep, co-heirs of Christ? Only God can do that. Only God. The same God who ruled Joseph's life also rules yours, and the same Savior who rescued Joseph's family has rescued us. Let's pray.